Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Kraft. I'm one of the associate pastors here and have the privilege of being pastor of congregational care, just like Hermie was, I guess. It's humbling listening to stories like this. It's humbling listening about someone's life like Hermie. It's humbling, and it makes me want to be a better pastor. I've only been here for about 3 years on staff here at Portland Christian Center. And since I've been here, there are probably a good handful of people that have made me wished I was here earlier, just so I could spend some more time and listen to them and glean from them. Hermie and Vi are some of those people for me. It was this fall, actually, I think, that some of the pastors and deacons went over to pray for Vi at the home. And I walked in there and I thought, man, this looks like does Indiana Jones live here? And Shari had this big old snake skin. It was like a python skin, right? She was chasing me around the house with it. And so we were waiting for some people to show up that were there to pray as well for Vi. And Pastor Joel looked at Hermie and Vi and said, hey, can you tell us some stories, some of your favorite stories from the mission field? And we sat there and just listened. Those are precious times. Those are powerful times. I love what these two gentlemen share today because the story goes on through men like this. He continues to live through men like this. And the ripple effect goes on and on and on. And you guys are testament to that today too as well. Isn't that right? You guys are here because you have been impacted by them. And so I'm blessed to be here today to get to read a few personal remarks from some of the family. As I'm a musician by trade. I played piano for years and led worship for years. I was listening to Pastor Joel read, and I kind of play a soundtrack. You ever do that? I play a little soundtrack in my head as he's reading, and it starts out with, oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. And then it went on to, on Christ's solid rock I stand. And after that, it kind of moved into the dun-dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun. Man, when you're living for Jesus, it is an adventure for sure. And so I, again, had the privilege here of reading some personal remarks from Carl and from Shari. And I think you'll play that soundtrack as well in your head. The first one is from Carl. It's extremely difficult to condense a stellar life into a few paragraphs. Nevertheless, in this brief tribute, hopefully his influence upon my life can be described. My earliest memories hold visions of him helping people, whether cramming one more person and their chickens into the already stifling heat of our 53 Chevy wagon, or performing triage for the seemingly endless line of people needing medical, dental, or spiritual help on our front yard every morning. He always knew what to do and when, and always did it with the utmost kindness and respect. In many ways, we were polar opposites. He was long-suffering and patient. He never had a bad attitude. He loved everybody equally. He always showed respect. He never lifted a hand against another human being. Naturally, he tried his best to instill in me those same attributes to varying effect. Dad lived a long life full of trophies, accomplishments, and milestones. God blessed him at every turn and multiplied his effects and efforts and dedication beyond what any of us could have ever hoped for. Yet his humility was on display for all to see. It used to bother me when he'd allow people to take advantage of him, but eventually I realized that it was his way of giving himself readily, completely, and without reservation. I knew he was proud of me, even though our philosophies of life sometimes differed. It delighted him, however, the few times he got into a situation in which I needed to act on his defense. I was always happy to do so, of course. His love for Mom and their precious relationship was like a beacon pointing to God's ideal and a wonder to all who knew them. It always gave me hope that such a bond might even be possible for me. Dad's no longer frail, no longer crippled, no longer needs a wheelchair. He's dancing before his God and rejoicing with the angels. No way would I ever want him to physically be back down here, because in reality, he's still with us, in our memories, in our thoughts, and always in our hearts. This next piece is from Shari. I consider myself blessed among daughters to have been given the daddy God chose for me. Daddy made it very easy for me to understand God's love as my Heavenly Father. I remember getting up early in the mornings to go out and ride my horse. Passing by the living room where he'd be praying, I would often hear my name mentioned and would pause to hear what he was asking God regarding me. I was able to understand God's mercy and forgiveness because of a daddy merciful in nature and forgiving at heart. Daddy was a wonderful storyteller, and he was, wasn't he? I remember sitting wide-eyed, listening to tell him about his dad caught a lion that was trying to kill him. He shoved his hand down its mouth, grabbed hold of its tail, and pulled that lion inside out. What was there not to believe? That was just one of the very many reasons Africans loved him, because he could make any sermon come alive. Daddy understood my love of all things breathing. From the little mouse he allowed to stay in my vanity drawer, where she made her nest and birthed 5 little teensy babies, to the monkeys and deer and bunnies, even lizards, and a vulture, really, okay, and a crocodile that I mothered. His tender heart and sweet spirit cried with me when my heart was broken over the eventual deaths of the many of my beloved pets. There was nothing Daddy couldn't do. From successful brain surgery on one of my dolls after she was dropped and her eyes rolled back in her head, to making a garage door mysteriously turn into a ping pong table. Daddy knew how to do everything. Daddy's humble spirit, gentle nature, deep sense of fairness and equality, and his resolute honesty won the hearts and respect of his family and of those he went to Africa to serve. He never considered himself better than anyone else, never expected special treatment, and always exemplified to his family and to the Africans a servant's heart. Daddy was the principal in our 2-student school. And when things occasionally got beyond teacher mama's ability to cope, Daddy would step in and lay down the law. Many were the times his belt and my bottom had a meeting. There were few opportunities for relaxing in his busy days, but I remember coming home from church, and on the rare Sunday, we stayed in, is it Baromo? Is that correct? Baromo? And didn't travel to one of the outstations. If it was cool enough that day, Daddy would turn on the light plant, which was a generator, so we could play records. And I'd sit in his lap while we listened to Cruising Down the River or The Missouri Waltz by Billy Vaughn. Daddy loved beautiful ties like women love jewelry. And he liked dressing sharp. He loved to eat. He loved his sweets. And he always, and not only appreciated the wonderful meals Mama made, but also made sure that she knew it. Daddy was a true romantic and loved recounting the story of his romance with Mama, and of course gloating over how he ultimately won the prize. Daddy loved looking at maps. Not so much scenery, but the rest of us would enjoy, mind you. But with his head buried in his map, he would happily inform us each of each upcoming town. No doubt from growing up during the Depression and living as a missionary, he saved everything, even wrapping short pieces of wire together and hanging them everywhere. He loved to tape things up, If it's a box going back home from Colorado with my kids and me, it ended up looking like it was being shipped to Africa. Even one piece of masking tape around an extension cord was good, then 6 pieces was much better. During his later years, Daddy loved to putz around his shop. Even if he didn't accomplish much, he loved to sharpen things, paint things, yes, even a couple of his caps. He loved to sweep up messes, loved to pick weeds. Man, I wish I knew him. He could come over to my house and do the same thing. And loved to doze while watering flowers. He loved highlighting and understanding the daily bread devotionals, marking with special ones with save or keep. That almost everyone ended up getting that special notation didn't seem redundant to him at all. I read something months back, written by another missionary's kid, that so caught my heart and exemplified my daddy that I saved it, knowing that the day wasn't too far off in the future when I would be honoring him at his memorial service. So here's what it said. Your dad, like my own, was a warrior. They were legends. Known to the hundreds of the Birkenab, close enough, they led to Christ. Imprinted upon the thousands of spiritual grandchildren, they and our mothers seated and loved the biological children before whom they modeled what it means to be a living sacrifice. In many ways, they were unknown and underestimated in their home countries. They were the nomads, pioneers, and heroes, men who left comfort, familiarity, and the security in a pursuit of the city not made by hands of men. They were unregretted sacrifices and experienced quiet loss because of their love for Jesus and the lost. Hebrews 11 so eloquently describes them as, this world was not worthy of them. When your dad left, a humble, tired, and battle-scarred soldier stepped happily into Jesus' arms in indescribable eternity. But we lost a mentor, a prayer warrior, a spiritual father, a de facto uncle, friend, apostle. And I'm feeling it in these days. Our parents are the remnants of a missionary wave that knew childhood poverty and world war, yet went to the ends of the earth in love and obedience to brave post-colonial instability, deadly diseases, extreme culture shock, and deep loneliness. And there they modeled vision, courage, humility, perseverance, and sacrifice. I'm feeling their absence more and more. We've been entrusted with a rare, disappearing heritage. By the grace of God, let's determine to model and transmit it all at all cost to a new generation. Thank you, Daddy, for being a man whose love and devotion were first to your Lord Jesus Christ, so that your love and devotion to your wife and your family and to those you ministered to throughout your entire life, whether in Africa or here in America, reflected Jesus to them and caused them to want for themselves what they saw in you. I'm so proud to be your daughter. And whether for bad, keeping everything, or good standing up for the underdog, I'm proud to be told you're just like your daddy. I'd like to take this moment to invite Brandon to come up here, one of the grandchildren, and he's also going to read some remarks this morning.
Good afternoon. My name is Brandon Phibbs. I'm Shari Neal's eldest son, and I've been asked to speak on behalf of the grandchildren. My grandfather was never what you might call a big man, but he was always larger than life to his grandkids. We grew up hearing exotic stories of Africa while sitting under the shadow of a stuffed lioness in my grandparents' living room. The house was bursting at the seams with African memorabilia that we never, even to this day, tire of handling and touching and seeing. It continues to fascinate us. In 2001, those childhood stories metamorphosed into memories when I had the chance to accompany my mother and my grandparents to Africa for several weeks. And when we landed in Ouagadougou, we were climbing off of the plane down to the tarmac, and my grandfather clutched my arm and he said, half joking, half serious, "Brandon, you're standing on holy ground." I was like a time-traveling fly on the wall. Suddenly, I was seeing all the places from my grandparents' stories. I was meeting the people that had populated those stories. And I got to hear my grandfather preach in church after church after church that he built. More than 50, we didn't preach in all of those, but he built more than 50 churches in Burkina. And in Burkina Faso, my grandparents seemed charged with electricity. They were in their element, more than I'd ever seen them before. My grandfather was not what you'd call a big man. But my grandmother confided in me while we were in Africa, "Your grandfather always stands up so much straighter here." Grandpa Hermie will forever hold a special place in John and Monica's hearts. Like all of us, their favorite memories were looking through their African artifacts, hearing about the adventures in Burkina Faso, opening the cedar chests, pulling out all the different items that Grandpa and Grandma would illustrate and tell them where they came from. And as they grew older, cherished moments were no less sweet, and they recognized how incredibly lucky they were to have Grandpa and Grandma in their lives. We all realize that. We're all, with the exclusion of perhaps one grandson or granddaughter, in our 40s, and we had our grandfather, and our grandmother continues with us. John and Grandpa went through a few things together over the years. John remembers that when Grandpa was building the Melbrook home nearly 40 years ago, my dad was helping, he said, so I was there a lot during construction. And one day, after the brand new garage floor was poured and finished, I thought it would be fun to nail some nails into scrap wood blocks. Well, the nails went through the blocks, leaving gouges in the sparkling new concrete floor. That was the start of me leaving my mark on Grandpa. John also remembers turning a rowboat over in a pond and he and Grandpa swimming frantically to shore, listening with rapt attention as Grandpa spun hunting stories all night long, water skiing behind Uncle Al's boat, Grandpa insisting on a kiss every morning when he dropped John off at school, a tradition John has continued to carry on with his own kids. Grandpa attending his high school football games and late Saturday night dirt car races in Lebanon, even though he would have to get up really early the next morning for church. But most of all, John remembers how Grandpa stood at the altar and said the most beautiful prayer he'd ever heard when he married Tori, the love of his life, now 24 years strong. And how Grandpa was at the hospital when each of the kids were born or had any sort of medical procedure. My grandpa has been there for me more times than I can remember, John said, not only in person, but also with his love of Jesus and prayer. Without that, I probably would not be here today. Grandpa, I love you so much. I thank you for everything you've done for me, and I will cherish all the memories we shared together. See you soon. Unlike John, I didn't live close enough to Grandpa to wean any of his construction and mechanical genius, which is something I'll always regret. Between growing up during the Depression and having to make do with less in Africa, after all, as we've heard, there were no stores, there were no repair shops, Grandpa learned to waste nothing and, more importantly, to fix or build anything. When he would come visit us in Colorado, he was Mr. Fix-It, repairing garage doors, building a ping pong table that would fit right over top of our picnic table. He would cut out rubber band guns from blocks of wood. You give him some twine and duct tape, and there's nothing that he couldn't do. And if anyone saw him putzing around in his shop, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My brother Jonathan recalls countless times helping Grandpa out in said shop, pounding soda cans flat at 6 a.m, organizing hundreds of differently sized screws into a motorcade of old coffee cans, cleaning and polishing an army of brooms and shovels, many of which were broken or even lost their appendages, and returning them to an overturned bucket in which Grandpa had drilled holes for them to rest in. Jonathan says it was a 15-minute job, max. It took us over 2 hours to painstakingly arrange everything, just so, and he got so upset if I tried to go faster. Grandpa was the hardest working, hardest loving man I've ever known. We all recall one trip to the coast when a squirrel darted in front of the car. Grandpa didn't have time enough to swerve out of the way, and the squirrel was killed. Now, we grandkids were sitting in the back seat. We didn't know this was going on. We weren't paying attention. We would have never known, except that Grandpa said, "Oh, I just ran over a squirrel." Instantly, my sister bursts into tears in the back seat, and my mom's like, "Daddy!" Lately, though, the thing that Jonathan has loved most was how Grandpa would continually retell his best of stories. He had a little collection of photos, Jonathan said, and every time he saw them, he'd remember these stories anew, and he would tell them to me as if I'd never heard them before, and I sat there and listened to them as if I'd never heard them before. Some of Gabby and Helen's favorite moments are more recent, of taking Grandpa to the Oregon International Air Show each September. He would thrill with childlike glee at the acrobatics, and last year, Gabby got him a World War II veteran ball cap that's sitting out there on that table. And she said he was mobbed all day by people thanking him for his service. And while these are all great memories, two profoundly simple things stand out for me. I will never forget his voice. If I could freeze a single moment in time, it would be listening to him recite the scriptures in the daily devotionals each morning, around a table piled high with Grandma's homemade bread and jam. In my professional life, I've worked with some great voices. I've worked with Morgan Freeman and others, the kind of standards of voice acting. I'd take my grandfather's voice over any of them. And secondly, my grandfather is known for his enormous heart. To know him was to feel the embrace of unconditional love. When others resisted, he leaned in. In emotionally dry places, he was an oasis of affection. And some of you have traveled hundreds of miles, some of you thousands of miles to be with him here because you felt my grandfather's love. Hermie Engelgau was never what you would call a big man. Over the last several decades, he was hunched with time and plagued by pain. He could not move as fast or stand as straight. And he was never smaller than when I saw him this Christmas, mere days before he died, sitting in his favorite chair, buried beneath blankets with Punky in his lap. Praying over our Christmas meal on Christmas Eve, he told his gathered clan, "I am so thankful I can celebrate Christmas with you. Who knows," he said, his voice breaking, "what it will be like next Christmas." We grandkids were lucky. We sensed the end coming and had time to prepare. We had time to tell him everything that we wanted to say to him. And this blunted a lot of the grief of his passing. But what really transformed those past couple weeks from a time of mourning to a time of celebration is how rich and how long his life was. He lived an extraordinarily deep and an extraordinary long life, fashioned around a singular goal, loving and helping others. And if life is defined by the good we do, the love we share, and the impact we leave behind, then my tiny, adorable grandfather was a giant of a man, a whale of a man, who touched and transformed countless lives, not the least of which were his grandkids.